Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Paris Talks Marketing. Today, I am speaking with Jeff Umbro, who is the CEO of the Podglomerate. And we're going to talk all about podcasting on today's podcast episode. So it's going to be kind of meta. And Jeff is going to enlighten us about a lot of things that we probably didn't know about podcasting and podcasting measurement. So with that, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope I can fill the tall order that you just gave me.
I'm sure you will. Start by telling us a bit about the Podglomerate. What's that all about?
Yeah. So the Podglomerate's a company I founded back in 2017. We are a podcast services company, and we really focus on three things. Producing podcasts, both white label and owned and operated IP. We market podcasts and work to grow their audiences through PR, marketing, cross promo, pitching the apps, paid acquisition. And we do that on behalf of a lot of, big, impressive brands, as well as small shows that are just trying to find their footing. And then we also monetize podcasts through ad sales, through some combination of partnerships, direct ad sales through agencies, and programmatic advertising. So we do all those things. There are 10 of us full time. We're fully remote all across the US, mostly the East Coast. And we've been around for nearly a decade. So in a nutshell, that's Podglomerate.
That's great. I was checking out your last LinkedIn post, and it seems that you were at a big podcasting event, the podcast movement event last week.
Yes.
Is that correct?
So that's one of the podcast movement is one of the biggest US podcast conferences. Happens twice a year. They have an August conference called Podcast Movement, which generally is for consumers more so. And then they have the business version of that, which happens every March, which is called Podcast Movement Evolutions. And it's kind of fun because they put it in a different city every time. So you get to just travel the country for it. And it's a great excuse to visit other people and places. So we just last week, as of this recording, had Podcast Movement 2024, which is in Washington, D.C. And that is often the event that we bring the entire Podglomerate team to. So we kind of treat it as both a conference and an offsite.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's super fun. If you're on my LinkedIn, then you'll see a few pictures of the team together and
see everybody with those glasses on. Is that
they gave us these. We went to a Washington Nationals baseball game and they gave us these silly sunglasses, fake Oakleys. And so we're all wearing them as kind of a joke, but yeah, it's super fun. And two of those folks in that photo, that was the first time that I had met them in person because we're fully remote. So I see everybody very randomly throughout the year based on work events and conferences and that kind of thing. I'm off on a little island up in New Hampshire, and we have people in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, North Carolina, Chicago. So we really savor those moments that we get to be together.
Yeah. We're doing our first team building of the year for our agency in October. And for the first time, we're going to be bringing people. We have people scattered across Bulgaria. And now we also have people in Serbia and Turkey. And we're going to be bringing all those folks together in a little village in the middle of Bulgaria to do some horseback riding.
That's fun. And here I am talking about how we're so spread out. We're in 4 different states. You have 3 different countries. That's wild.
Yeah, but actually, geographically speaking, though, I think it's probably even a tighter radius than your
That's
team.
probably true, but you still need passports.
Culturally, probably there's a bigger difference.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's really awesome. Looks like you're having a lot of fun at this picture, and baseball games are great.
Yeah, well, it was a really fun week. I'm really happy that we got to do it.
Yeah. Let's get into podcasting, and we'll start with the big picture because a lot of our listeners, I'm sure that all of our listeners listen not only to this podcast, but to lots of others. So they're podcast consumers, and a lot of them have heard that they should be doing a podcast. Maybe some of them haven't started for various reasons, but let's just start with the big picture, the how and the why. I'm sure that you are no stranger to explaining to folks why they should start a podcast and why it's not as difficult as they might think it is. How would you pitch me if I'm on the fence and I can benefit?
So I actually would reframe that question and I would say, why shouldn't you start a podcast? Okay. And it's a very funny thing and a weird distinction, but in my experience, there are people who want to make a podcast for a few different reasons. They want to grow something that is large enough that they can monetize it. they want to build thought leadership and use this as like a vehicle to get some kind of recognition within their industry or their discipline, or they want to use this as a like lever to generate new leads for their business. And there are a lot of other like reasons to start a podcast. Like, maybe you just want to talk to your friends and this is the excuse to do it. And that's great. You should do that every time. If that's your goal, go for it. If your goal is to have this as a business application, then you should pause before you start a podcast. You should think about what you're hoping to achieve. And then you should look at like how you're going to measure that achievement. And then you can turn around and say, like, should I take the time, resources, and money that is required to make a podcast and do that? Or should I do something else? And something that I actually wanted to mention is that like there are 3 ways in which you can utilize podcasting as a whole to kind of reach those different goals that I just mentioned that can include making your own show, but don't have to. So for example, what I mean by that is you as like a subject matter expert or as like a business professional can pitch yourself as a guest on other podcasts. So let somebody else do all the hard work to build it and make it. And you can just show up and give them your nuggets of wisdom. A la me right now. The second would be like, if you're a big brand and you have the budget to make a show, like that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the time to make a show or the expertise. So you can take that and put that into like advertisements on other podcasts. So if I were to buy an ad on your show, Paris, and say like, I want you to talk about how great we are at podcast marketing to all of your clients or whatever, then that's another option. And then the third bucket is what I would call like, making a show. It could be a chat show. It could be a branded podcast. There's a few different like avenues that you can go in order to create something. But just like everything else, like whether you're doing social media or writing a newsletter or, building a website, like if you're going to do it, you got to do it right if you want it to actually have like the impact that you're hoping for. And if you're not going to do it right, then like you should save yourself the trouble.
And when you say doing it right, let's dig into that a bit. I think about that coming in a few parts. One is doing it long enough so that you find your voice and yet you build an initial community, however small, or of loyal listeners. Also that you make the right investment in the equipment and all the professional aspects to polish it. Well, do you agree with me? And what else am I missing? And what else is included in the get it right definition?
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you asked because like I think that so much of that depends on like what your goals are, that like your answer is going to change based on who you are and what you're trying to do. For example, to address both of the things that you just said, like investing in the equipment, for example, like that, you can and should do that if you're going to try and have something that looks very professional. But the truth is that like an iPhone could do most of the stuff that we're doing right now with this software and hardware. It's more about the content than anything. Like the Kanye West Super Bowl commercial, if you're familiar with that, like is a very silly example of that, but like it was effective for whatever he was trying to do. And for anyone who isn't, the joke was that Kanye spent too much money on the ad itself. So when he didn't have a budget left to actually record a commercial, so he just like recorded a video on his phone and that was the Super Bowl ad. And then the second part of that is like, do it long enough to find your community. Like I do really agree with that. Like if you're going to put the time into creating something, like you should put some kind of timeline on that. I made a show last year called Podcast Perspectives where I'd speak to people within the podcasting industry. And there's a very specific goal in mind for that show. To be blunt, like I don't really care about the listenership. Like I really want to get in a room with all of these people I admire and that I like want to work with in the future. But I told myself when I launched that, like I'm doing this for 50 episodes no matter what. And like I set aside the budget and the time and got the staff to do that. So like to your point, yes, like there was a lot of me like, making sure that I did it the right way and building the community. But in addition to that, I recorded 15 episodes of that show before I ever published one of them. And the reason that I did that was because I wanted to like make sure that I was actually doing a good job hosting the show, making sure that the format was correct, making sure that it looked good and sounded good, making sure that I was giving the guest and the listener what I thought that they needed. And I drove my production team crazy because they're just like, Jeff, like, what are we doing here? Yeah. And at a certain point, like you just have to release the thing. It's never going to be perfect. But like I can tell you that there is like a big difference between that first one that we did and then the first one that we published. And I think that's really important because like if you're going to be putting something out in the world like publicly and visibly to like, especially in that case where the entire goal was to like kind of show off like what we're capable of, you have to make sure that you're showing off something that you're actually proud of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when I say doing it the right way, like that's going to be different for everybody. But I think the key is really just like, at the very least, making sure that you've like sat down and thought about what you're hoping to achieve. And then what you're putting out is like helping you move a little bit forward to achieving that.
Yeah. One of the things that I find interesting and that a lot of brands I think don't consider is the option to advertise in podcasts. And I think this has to do with the fact that, to my knowledge, there isn't a widely known marketplace where I can just go in and browse and place ads.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is, but maybe you can enlighten me here a little bit.
And
how
there
could
sure
I
is.
advise my clients who might be more interested in just advertising in podcasts? Where do they go, or how can we help them do that?
Yeah. So there's a few things I'll touch on. There are marketplaces where you can buy podcast ads. There's some that are what are called programmatic marketplaces. So Podbean, Spotify, AdSwiz, where you can go in and say, like, I would like to reach, middle-aged women in Ohio, and they can target demographically based on IP mapping to like run these ads to target those folks. And then there's some ads that you can run that same way through like categories. So you can say like, I want to run this on news shows, or I want to run this on like sports radio or something. And you can run your ads that way. And it's kind of simple. Like you go in, you tell them your budget, you tell them what your goals are, you give them an audio recording, or you ask them to record something for you on your behalf. And you can run the ad like that way.
Is that them saying something like, "Hey, this episode is brought to you by Hop Online," and blah blah
blah?
Yeah,
and you'll provide them with a script and like your call to action and everything is in there. That is the way that like you'll see like big brands doing it, and it's generally more of a brand awareness campaign than something that they're hoping to like really measure like on a conversion basis. And I love all podcast ads, but I'll tell you that's my least favorite kind. And all of those are real places that you can go. You can go to ads.spotify.com. You can go to, I actually don't know the URL, but Podbean does this, AdSwiz does this, Spreaker does this, many others. Your listeners can go to that today. And they're going to have different price points in which you can like enter that marketplace, but like it's available. You can go in with $500 to Spotify and buy those ads right now. What I would recommend people do if they're interested in this to have a slightly better experience and hopefully to have better conversions is to go to one of two marketplaces that are a little bit more manual. One of them is called AdvertiseCast, and one of them is called Gumball. So AdvertiseCast is a company that's owned by Libsyn. Gumball is a company that is owned by HeadGum. And both of them have marketplaces where you can log in and you can browse the shows that they have on this marketplace. There are thousands of them on each of these platforms. And you can say, oh, this show looks great. It's all about cybersecurity. I'm representing a VPN brand. I would like to buy 2 ads on that show, like one this week and one next week. And in that marketplace, you can actually select like when you want it to run, how many impressions you want it to run, where you want it to run in the episode. You can send them a script. There's a portal where you can actually listen to the recording. And in some instances, you can provide feedback to that recording. And then you can run that campaign via this platform. You pay by credit card. It's very easy. And then that ad's going to run. So that's how you actually run these things. And then there are 1,000 marketplaces that are like individual publishers that are selling these spots, including the Podglomerate. So you can email Podglomerate or the New York Times or Wondery, and you can say, I'd like to buy ads on these shows. Can you please send me like a rate card? And then we would do the same process, but a little bit more manually. And the result of that is you're going to get something that's hopefully a lot more customized and better for like what you're hoping to achieve. So those are the different marketplaces that people can access today. And then the question becomes like, how do you know if this is successful? Like, what are you actually putting in these ads? How are you measuring it? Would it be helpful if I talked about those things?
I was just going to ask you that follow-up question, which is that, how do you eventually trace that audio ad back to something measurable through a call to action?
Sure. Well, I think I'll happily talk about that, but I think first we should cover like what you should include in these ads. You kind of touched on this before, but I think the idea is making sure that you are communicating like what the service or the product is that you're selling, and then what action you're hoping people will take. I'm selling this bar of soap that I think is so great. You can go to this website to buy this bar of soap. And the beauty of podcast advertising beyond like a LinkedIn ad or something is that you can really customize those reads. When somebody's listening to a podcast, when they're listening to your podcast, Paris, they're developing a relationship with you as the host of the show. So they know that they can trust what you're saying. They know that they can take like your word as gospel if you're doing a great job and say like, Paris told me to do this, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So the idea is that like if you're going to advertise a product, then your listeners already have that relationship with you. So you talking about this, giving it your personal endorsement, lending it your voice is going to translate to more conversions on that product. So that's a lot of how people are selling these things. And then how do you measure it? There's a lot of different ways to do this, and I'll give you a broad overview, but if anybody's really interested, I would recommend that they go and talk to these platforms that I'm about to mention, because there's a little bit of like manual things that need to go into it. But using a service like Podscribe, Podscribe, Barometer, Barometer, Spotify Ad Analytics, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a dozen of them, but there are services that exist. Spotify Ad Analytics is probably the easiest, that will allow you to place a prefix in the RSS feed. And what that means, so your podcast is distributed through an RSS feed, and you can place a prefix on your RSS feed that will allow you to actually measure like how many people are hitting that RSS feed in the first place. And then you can place a pixel in the ad unit that you're putting on the podcast. And so what's happening is you're able to track the number of people who hit the pixel versus the number of people who hit the prefix. So if 100 people download this show, the prefix is going to show that 100 people downloaded it. And if 80 of them make it to your mid-roll ad, then you're going to trigger 80 pings to that pixel. So you're going to say first that 80% of our listeners heard this ad and we served 80 impressions. And second, you are going to be able to say, like, compare against the two. And then you're also, if you want to, you can measure podcast to podcast attribution that way. And then you're also able to put a pixel onto a web browser. So you're able to say, for example, of those 80 people that heard this ad, 20 of them then went to this website that I told them to go to. So I'm selling this bar of soap. 80 people heard that ad for this bar of soap. 20 of them triggered the pixel on the website for that bar of soap. So then you're able to do all of your like retargeting and your pixel tracking marketing on other platforms. You're able to track conversions for people who both hit the landing page and for people who actually converted to a sale. And you're able to see how many people heard the ad in the first place, which for some people is the goal. Like if you're advertising a movie, you're probably not tracking ticket sales. You just want people to know about the movie. So anyway, there's a lot of ways to do this. And the dashboards are really accessible and pretty. And I don't think enough people know that those exist.
Yeah. So I want to recap. Those three tools are Podscribe, Barometer, Spotify Ad Analytics. Those are the top three where people can go and check out their KPIs for podcast ads.
Those are three of them, and probably three of the top ones. They all do similar things in different ways. So it's not like one's better than the other. But the one that I personally use more than any of them is Spotify Ad Analytics.
Okay. One of the things that I know as a podcast listener, I hear a lot of ads that mention the campaign, either the mini site or the landing page. And it's this really long URL and, go to ///. And I'm thinking, well, I've never heard anybody do this, but I want to bounce the idea off of you. What about just telling people to go to Google and search for Jeff Umbro's deal?
Yeah.
And when you do that, you just bid Google ads on that term just to make sure that you're going to be at the top of that page every time. You'd pay for the click, but it'd be really cheap.
It's really smart. I think there are two things inherent in your question. One is like, yes, you can 100% do that. You can do whatever you want if you're advertising on a podcast. Like as long as the show approves, like you can tell people to go do jumping jacks, It's funny. I've never actually thought about that. That's a really smart idea and could be like a very funny viral campaign if you do it the right way. I always think back to, there was an ad years ago. I heard this story. I don't even know if it's true, but some guy was applying for a job and he wasn't getting any responses. So he bought all of the keywords for the names of the people who were reviewing the applications. So he knew that everybody would Google themselves. So whenever they did, his resume would pop up and it would say, "Hey, please hire me."
Brilliant. And it worked, didn't it?
I think so. I mean, it's been so long, I have no idea, but I think that guy got like some creative director position. So yes is the answer, but inherent in the question is like, how can you make it a little bit less complicated for people to find like your product? You can do vanity URLs. You can do like, you can put a link to the show or to the product in the metadata in like the description of the episode, which weirdly is like incredibly effective.
When I'm listening, I mean, it's easy enough to just pop right into the show notes, and if the link is there, click through.
So that's exactly right. And that's what people are doing. And there's actually some data that I have that shows how effective that is. It's very effective. But the idea is you can make that journey easier for people. And I always get like, I always am very conflicted with that, because there's some people that come up with really clever ways to try and make that like a fun journey for listeners. But at the end of the day, almost every test I've ever made in this space is like, just the easier, the better. And a big thing that people used to do a lot, and some people still do, is they'll run ads via promo codes. So they'll say like, go to bombas.com /podcast and type in code, Paris. And that's an ineffective way to do this, and like something that's tried and true. But to your point before, it's not the best user experience.
Yeah. That's a lot of heavy lifting and memorizing URL and promo code. But anyway, I think there's some clever ways. Pontiac, you mentioned the Kanye West Super Bowl ad. Pontiac did a Super Bowl ad. It was probably like 5 years ago. And they were the first ones, I think, to instead of trying to send somebody to a website, they said to go to Google and search for Pontiac something. And that was really effective, because I think what that did was, from an SEO perspective, I think that page was ranked below the fold, but because of the massive clicks, it pushed it up to the number one spot. This
is why I love these conversations, Paris, because that's the kind of thing that like is probably, I mean, A, that's brilliant and like very out of the box thinking. And B, that's the kind of thing that would never happen in podcasting. In my opinion, what has happened with podcasting over the last decade is that you have a ton of people who are podcast first, like they want to make a show and they love creating the show, and then they're forced to find a way to market it. Most people don't know how to market a podcast. So what ends up happening is you have a bunch of people who are using the exact same methods to try and grow their show, and it gets kind of boring sometimes. So I love that idea. I want to do more stuff like that. But anyway, that's kind of an aside from this conversation, but something that I have like a small gripe with.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit that we struggle with that ourselves for this show, because there's obviously paid and organic, and we found that with paid, YouTube ads were the most effective in terms of just getting the number of views. Now, these are not downloads anymore, because these are just people that are watching on YouTube, not downloading on their podcast player. That worked better than anything else from paid. From an organic perspective, we have an email newsletter and we promote through that. I've got a fairly large LinkedIn audience, but that's a lot harder. But do you have any tips for promoting a podcast, either through paid channels that are very cost efficient, or organic channels that are not the obvious ones?
I sure do. At Podglomerate, we have what we call our 5-tier approach. So it's PR, marketing, cross promo, paid, and pitching the apps. But generally, just because I could literally go all day on this, and I don't want to waste your time on that. Like, anyone is welcome to go to the podglomerate.com, where we actually have like a lot of blogs about exactly this. But the big way that is very effective, that's a little bit outside of the box of like a typical marketing campaign, would be what's called cross promos. So actually like working with like-minded podcasters, like for you, other marketing shows, for example, and recommending each other's shows on the show. So you recommend, podcast X, and podcast X recommends your show. And that could be through their newsletter. It could be on the audio property itself. It could be like over social media. There's a lot of different ways to get creative with that. And then there's also publicity, pitching the podcasting apps. There is paid acquisition. There is using your own channels. But at the end of the day, I think the key is just like remembering that it's a lot easier to find a podcast listener for somebody who already listens to podcasts as it is like to try and convert a brand new like non-listener to becoming a listener and then becoming a listener of your show. So it gets a little complicated. And then from a production point of view, it's kind of a combination of a few things, but the two easiest are just like make the show more engaging. And I love your show. It's very engaging. But you can look at the consumption data on your show and you can actually see like where people are falling off in every episode. Maybe you have like a long monologue or something and like people turn it off. Or you have too many ads in the beginning and people turn it off. And you can use that to influence like how you're actually like editing the show in order to give somebody the better experience. Because it's a lot easier to keep and retain a listener than to find a new one. And then another like fun trick is just like have guests on the show that have big profiles that like are relevant to your audiences. So find somebody with 10,000 LinkedIn followers that works in marketing. Find somebody who has a big newsletter like about marketing, and then, politely request before they come on the show that they can share that with their channels.
Yeah.
So there's some tips and tricks, but there's a lot more if you head out to the podglomerate.com and you can check out like some of the blogs that we've written.
Awesome. I want to pivot over to formats. And
yeah,
I think for a lot of, particularly a lot of brands that start podcasts to promote themselves, the interview format, what we're doing here, a one-on-one interview, seems to be the most popular. But I've started recently listening to the All In podcast. And I'm sure you know that one. I think it's number one.
Yeah.
In the world
It depends when you look, but it's up there.
It's always in the top bunch.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons they've had success is you've got four guys who clearly have a history together. They're friends, and it sounds like they're just sitting in the backyard with at the barbecue with beers. But it's really sharp. But this is a format that I think is very interesting. Well, they have interviewed from time to time. They interviewed Donald Trump, and they do sometimes break that format. But are there ways to innovate with format in podcasting? Because I think that so many of us are just doing the one-on-one interview.
Yeah, for sure. I will caveat what I'm about to say with the idea that everything that you do in podcasting should be based off of like the resources that you have. So if you like don't have the time, the money, the expertise to do something, then like you should stay, kind of like within your limitations, unless you really want to try and experiment with something new. Like I see people all the time who are trying to do something that is very ambitious, which is amazing. I love that. Like you should challenge yourself, but often it's too ambitious. And the result is something that could have been better if they had tried to make it a little bit simpler. So within that context and that framing, I look at formats in a bunch of different ways. There's really like, I don't know, a dozen different kinds of podcasts that you can make, but I'm going to talk about 3 of them today. And I think that will cover the vast majority of what people like would ever want to do. But you have interview shows, you have narrative interview shows or narrative shows, and then you have like investigative shows. So interview, in my mind, would be what we are doing today, or the All In podcast. I actually think it's kind of the same format, in my opinion.
Oh, okay.
It's a panel discussion on the All In podcast. Like there are 4 guys who are very casually like, sitting at a table and chatting or over Zoom or whatever. But the idea is really that it's a talking head show. And you have people who are communicating. There's not a lot of like, bells and whistles that goes into the edit. I'm sure that they're like, curating that conversation and making sure that it goes through the filter of whatever editor they're working with and making it sound okay. But they're not including like music or sound effects or actualities or voiceover or anything like that. So to me, that is kind of the idea. Those shows really lend themselves very easily to video as well, which is like a big trend in the industry that people are putting out videos for everything that they're doing. Whereas if you're doing like a big narrative production, like it's a lot harder to put a video element to that, like without spending a lot more money. So there's chat shows or interview shows. A narrative interview show is something that's a little bit more in between. If you're familiar with Jay Klaus's Creator Science podcast.
I was thinking of Only Murders in the Building, but that's not a real one. But that would be more of the investigative, perhaps.
Well, yes and no. I guess to break it down, a narrative interview in my mind, or a narrative podcast, is something that is interview based and is supplemented with like actualities or voiceovers or like supplementary material in general. Okay. So you might include multiple interviews. You might include like the host going back and saying like, and to clarify what they're talking about here, you should look at X, Y, and Z. Or maybe they bring in like, a audio from a video clip somewhere or something. Maybe there's audio transitions and like some sound design and stuff. So it's something that like follows a structure. That structure is based off of some kind of narrative. And occasionally there's a lot of like additions that go into those shows. And then what I called investigative before, I'll call it more like reported, but a show like The Daily or like Only Murders in the Building or like, WBUR just put out something called Beyond All Repair. And it's the idea of like really, really like kind of making a documentary or like what you might see in like a long magazine piece or something where you have multiple sources. You're not necessarily like hearing about all of them in the show. There is a story being told and it is being supported by all of the like audio clips that you have and stuff. Yeah. And traditionally it's like very well sound designed and beautiful and blah, blah, blah.
Would the Human Labs be an example of that? Investigative?
Yes and no. That's a funny one because it's I would put that in the interview show camp.
Oh, okay.
But like the point is less about like how to categorize things and more about just like you should create a show that you think is going to be a value add for your listeners and based on whatever industry you're working in. And you should communicate that value in the best way that you think is possible, in the most engaging way that you think is possible, within the bounds of the resources that you have available to put into that project. And it's tricky because like I would argue that like some of the best podcasts ever are just talking heads. And some of the best podcasts ever like are also crazy reported pieces that took years. So I don't know. I think to your initial question of like, are you seeing people experiment with the format? Yes, 100%. Do I think everybody should be experimenting with it? Not really.
Yeah, got it. Well, Jeff, this has been great. And I know we've got to wrap up relatively soon, but I can't let you go without asking this question, which is, what are your favorite podcasts? Give me your top 3 right now. What are your top 3 that you're listening to?
This is like asking like my favorite kid. I will give you 3 podcasts, 2 that are like just for fun. And well, I'll give you 4, 2 that are for fun, 2 that we're working on. So for fun, 2 that I'm listening to that play with the form in a lot of the ways that you're talking about before. One would be the Ezra Klein Show, which is from the New York Times opinion. And it is part interview, part monologue. And I'm just fascinated by Ezra Klein in general. I think he's kind of having a moment. I know you're out in Bulgaria, but like the US is going through a very weird election right now. And so it's kind of fascinating to listen. And the second for fun would be something called Acquired, which maybe you're familiar with, but it's super fascinating. It's these 2 guys, Ben and David, who are investors who have spent the last decade doing these super long narrative episodes about different businesses and like how they business, but it's their entire journey. Like, how did they start? What are they doing today? Like, what makes them exceptional? So for example, they just did an episode on Microsoft and there are going to be 3 parts to this episode. Each episode is 4.5 hours long.
Whoa.
And these guys just did the most exhaustive research that you can ever imagine on each of these different properties that they talk about. They do like 5 or 6 a year and they like really just go for it. It's very similar to Hardcore History with Dan Carlin, if you're familiar.
No.
And that's another one. It's completely different topic, but similar idea. But these guys just did so much research and like so clearly love the things that they talk about that it's kind of enchanting a little bit to listen to.
Yeah.
And it's basically like an audiobook. It's so long. So those are two, I guess three that I listen to for fun. And then for work, we're working on one show. We're helping market a show called Master Plan, which is all about like corruption in America, American politics. It's with David Sirota, who is a speechwriter for Bernie Sanders. Really, really fun show to work on. Big investigative reporting project. And then we're also working on a show called A Fine Mess with a woman named Sabrina Mirage.
For that one, actually.
Oh, great. That shows that we're doing our job. And it is super fun. It's basically like a narrative interview style show about how to have tough conversations. And each episode focuses on like a different topic that like is probably difficult to talk about at Thanksgiving or like a family meal. And it's a pretty good one. We help produce and market that one. And we just had an episode with Sam B from, previously from the Daily Show and then from the Sam B Show. We have a great episode coming out with Jason Pfeiffer all about like AI. We have an episode with a marriage counselor named Kat Hertline all about like, how to have difficult conversations with loved ones that have different philosophies than you do. Anyway, I could go all day, but there's the one thing that we're not lacking in 2024 is good podcasts to listen to. I could give you 500 examples if you wanted them. So like I recommend everybody, listen to every episode of this show, but then once you got through the whole catalog, open up your Spotify or Apple Podcast app and just see what's out there and you'll find something that you like.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I'm going to let you go and get to all of the meetings you've stacked up for yourself today. And
thank you.
Good luck with that, because my day is my entire week is ending right about now.
I am so jealous.
This is a great way to wrap it up for me. And I've taken a lot of notes. I'm going to check out these podcasts. I'm going to check out Gumball, AdvertiseCast, Podscribe, Barometer, Spotify Ad Analytics. You've really enlightened me here, and hopefully our audience too, who are interested in doing a podcast or maybe already running podcasts. So thanks for sharing the nuggets. Where can people find you online?
Sure. You can search my name, Jeff Umbro. I'm mainly, on LinkedIn at this point. And then you can also check out the podglomerate.com, Podglomerate. And thank you, Paris, so much. This was really fun.
Thank you too. It was great talking to you, Jeff.
Yeah. Awesome.